Hello, 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 people. Welcome back to the mufcMPB YouTube channel. What a day it has already been, and we're about to make it a lot better for you Manchester United fans out there. The one, the only, the brilliant Ben Jacobs is joining me today. Normally, we have a little chat about what we've been up to, if we're getting enough rest, but today we do not have the time, do we, Ben? Straight into things, my friend. You know where we're going to start. A certain Leny Yoro to Manchester United. What can you tell us about this?
Yeah, this is an incredible bit of business for Manchester United if it's completed. So at the time of recording, he's travelled over for the medical, the personal terms are being finalised, and this is the kind of deal that really makes a statement because Leny Yoro, make no mistake, is a generational talent. And if Manchester United get him ahead of Real Madrid, then it will be a clear indication of what the Ratcliffe-led sporting department are capable of. So if we take a step back, the first thing to say is that most in the industry for many weeks thought that Real Madrid was the not just most likely destination, but potentially the only destination. And that meant, for example, that Liverpool backed off, PSG cooled their talks because everybody thought the direction of travel was Real Madrid. And Real Madrid's tactic was just to wait and then eventually strong arm Lille and say, look, if you don't accept a lower offer than Manchester United ended up having accepted, then the player's going to wait and you'll get nothing for him and he'll leave on a free transfer. But instead of that happening, Manchester United thought, why not try? Because if they have an offer accepted, then there's two advantages. One is the fact that you've got Lille, and they then said to Yoro, go and join Manchester United. It's 62 million euros. It sets the club up. It's the deal that we want to take. And then the second factor is that Yoro started to think, wait a minute, maybe the Real Madrid move won't happen. Maybe Real Madrid don't value me as highly as they're saying because they've not bid anywhere near the kind of number that Lille are looking for. So Manchester United played upon Lille and they played upon the fact that actually Yoro wanted a relatively quick decision on his future. And after the conversations had taken place with Yoro and they'd had this bid accepted last week, Manchester United said to Yoro, take your time, think about it, we wait for your answer, and he respected that as well. So they've handled everything perfectly so far. Of course, even though the player's in Manchester at the time of recording, you still never say it's done until the medical's passed and it's signed. And this is why Manchester United want to move fast. But if everything aligns, and of course at this stage Manchester United are confident because they've booked the medical, this will be a phenomenal bit of business. And we've spent much of the summer talking about other centre-backs like Jared Brentwaite and Matthias de Ligt, but Manchester United's top idealistic centre-back priority was always Leny Yoro. And the only reason we weren't talking about it as much is because there was this feeling, as I say, for many weeks that Real Madrid were in the box seats. So Manchester United were turning their attention concurrently to other names. But once they got clear indication that actually maybe they were moving into pole position, it was always going to be the case that they would turn their budget first to Yoro. And now we're going to have to wait and see based on outgoings what else they can afford. So if this is signed in the next few days, then it can definitely be referred to as a statement signing one of the top centre-back prospects and already able to play immediately in the Premier League because of his level of talent. So when people use that phrase generational talent, it's often a bit flippant, but I don't think that's an over-exaggeration in this case. So it will be a super bit of business for Manchester United, one for the fan base to get really excited about.
Yeah, absolutely. You've hit the nail on the head in terms of the excitement amongst the Manchester United fan base. But I think from a personal perspective, there is a little bit of hesitation going forward, not because, of course, a brilliant talent like Yoro is joining, but it almost gets into this situation again, doesn't it? That if Manchester United do go into the new season with Martinez and Yoro, an unbelievable partnership potentially. But if an injury happens to Martinez, despite Yoro's potential, despite his ability, Manchester United's defensive reluctancy will almost come back in again because they're going to be basically holding on to an 18-year-old to steady the ship. So I do think it's going to be one that they potentially do need to sign another centre half. But as you've just alluded to there, Ben, you know that they may have to sell before that. Where does that leave the De Ligt deal? Because I know yourself and myself as well have both reported. You know, De Ligt has been desperate to join Manchester United. That's the only club in his sight, shall we say. So is he still willing to wait to join Manchester United? And where does that leave him potentially coming to Old Trafford?
Yeah, De Ligt wants Manchester United, and he knows that Manchester United were never deciding between Yoro or him, or Yoro and Branthwaite, or him and Branthwaite, or Yoro. It's a case of a minimum of two centre backs, but between now and the end of the window. So De Ligt might have to be patient. I think from Bayern's point of view, they want somewhere with bonuses included approaching 50 million euros, and Manchester United will now have to wait on outgoings. But both De Ligt and Branthwaite can't be classified as no longer targets. It's just a case of, as we've said many times, Manchester United need outgoings. You may remember in a previous show, I said, this was probably May, that Manchester United, like 12 months ago, want to make two quick signings before the pre-season to get those players on the American pre-season tour for a maximum of 100 million. And if they can, closer to 80 million pounds. What's happened? Joshua Zirkzee and, if everything goes according to plan, Leny Yoro have come in for, in terms of the guaranteed fee part, roughly 90 million euros, which is what, about 80 million quid. So that would suggest that Manchester United are on track with what they always planned. Two quick signings for under 100 million, closer to 80 million if they can. They've come in. Same as Mason Mount and Andre Onana 12 months ago. And now, with those two in, if everything goes according to plan with Yoro, everything else is a little bit of a jigsaw. And that's not because they've paid more for Yoro or a few million euros more for Xerxes because they didn't trigger the release clause. That's very much pre-planned. And there is an acceptance, as Jim Ratcliffe has said many times, including on record, that it's not just all going to be done in one window. So now we wait and see who they can clear out. And we know that there's Fulham and Scott McTominay, there's West Ham and Aaron Wan-Bissaka, there's still potentially Casemiro and Saudi Arabia, there's Greenwood, who's now agreed to go and join Marseille. And even though Sancho has cleared the air, there's still the possibility between now and the window he's sold, and that will allow Manchester United to move the market. But they don't have that 50 million euros right now in order to bring in De Ligt, which means if they sign him, then across the next financial year, they'll have to think, how can they get their outgoings, either between now and the end of this summer, or of course in January, or before the next cutoff in the early part of the window in 2025. And that's where we now have this balancing act because of the financial situation and the PSR rules that the Ratcliffe part of Manchester United and their sporting department have inherited. So De Ligt is prepared to wait, but what we know is that earlier in the window, Manchester United thought Tosin was great value and they tried to hijack that deal, but he ended up joining Chelsea nonetheless. So a much more economical option, and it might be that the ideal target is still De Ligt, but not at the ideal price. So let's wait and see whether or not outgoings allow them to still move in that direction, and the same for Jared Branthwaite, or they'll have to look at a more economical option to add depth. And the last point I wanted to make is that when you look at these other targets, it's not necessarily a case that they would come in and end up starting, and then Yoro perhaps would need a little bit more time, or as you said earlier, Yoro would play, and if they don't get the other targets, then they're thin. I think with Yoro, the expectation is that despite his age, he's ready right now. And not only is he an exceptional defender, 6'2", can have an impact in both boxes, physical presence, dominates in aerial duels, very strong tackler and not a rash one. But you'll notice when you see him, the composure and the maturity is already there. So I wouldn't look at Yoro as somebody that just because he's 18 and has a big future ahead of him isn't ready for Manchester United now. And I think that is the biggest compliment of all, that given the opportunity to have De Ligt and pay a little bit more, but get that deal done quite routinely, or really break the bank and meet Everton's valuation for Jared Branthwaite, they've instead put the big money behind Yoro. And I think that tells you that Manchester United don't just see him as a signing for the future, they see him as someone that can be a starter from day one.
Perfect, Ben. I mean, I can go sleep a happy boy after that. That is superb and great news, and definitely music to the ears of Manchester United fans. I've just got a couple of more questions in terms of potential incomings before we move on to what presumably will be a very busy department when it comes to departures at Manchester United. I've got two names I want to talk to you about. We'll start with Ugarte in midfield. Now, this is a wider question I wanted to ask you. Manchester United, of course, need a central midfielder. It's clear that despite it not being right at the top of the priority list, this is an area of concern in terms of bringing in some new bodies or at least another player in that department. And as I've said, Ugarte's been linked. He's probably been the only one that I've seen at the moment who has had some concrete links, if you like, to join Manchester United. What can you tell us? Are talks still ongoing with this deal? Is he the only target, or would you say he's just the top target?
Yeah, I think the midfield is moving parts. So again, centre back and striker the priorities, and then from there it's about finding the budget and seeing who exits. So naturally, if Scott McTominay went to Fulham, if Casemiro went to Saudi Arabia, if Christian Eriksen departed, it becomes a big priority, and you raise some funds in the process. But if those players were to stay at the football club, less of a urgent priority. If you were just talking idealistically, yes, but as Ratcliffe has said, he might need 3 to 5 windows because of the domestic financial rules and the fact you can't do everything overnight. But in terms of that central midfield, I think they want quite a versatile midfielder, ideally left-sided, but not entirely fixed on that. And target-wise, Manuel Ugarte, as you say, is one option. Nothing is so advanced at this point that we can get too excited about it. And Manchester United sources have been insistent for quite some time that they still haven't placed a formal offer. Although when I speak to PSG people, they're adamant that more than one verbal offer has been placed. So you get a bit of rewriting, especially if a bid, verbal or formal, is rejected, where sometimes the prospective buyer downplays it because they don't want to get people excited and they don't want to show their hand because maybe they're going to be moving with a similar ballpark budget for another player and they don't want to let slip what they've ultimately bid for a like for like. So this is why you get an element of papering over the reality of whether a bid or no bid was placed, especially if it's verbal. But PSG sources I speak to are adamant that there's been more than one verbal offer, and their valuation of Manuel Ugarte is 60 million. And the only real reason why PSG are prepared to entertain offers is because they may move in that position and want to spend big money, particularly with Benfica's João Neves, who's been linked with Manchester United, but it's really PSG pushing for him. And I'd be surprised if PSG don't make a formal offer in the region of 75 or 80 million euros, which means then they might want to offset some of that by allowing Manuel Ugarte to go. So keep an eye on PSG moving in the market, because if that eventuality happens, then the price might drop a little bit for Manuel Ugarte. But right now it's 60 million euros valuation, and Manchester United's verbal number is at least 15, if not 20 million euros less than that. And this is why there's been no progress at this point. But they're still there, and Bayern are one to watch as well. And then João Gomez at Wolves is a relatively long-standing name that Manchester United in the old regime had looked at. So let's wait and see now whether Dan Ashworth and some of the other newer people take that forwards. And remember, the other one that they were looking at was Kiernan Dewsbury-Hall, but of course he ended up joining Chelsea, and for a relatively modest fee, considering the player that he was last season in the Championship and can grow into. Now he's playing at a top club, but Manchester United chose not to move, and I think Chelsea would have always had the advantage there anyway because of the Enzo Maresca factors. There's been plenty of midfielders that Manchester United are considering, but they're just going to wait first and see who departs.
Yeah, it makes total sense. And in terms of, you just mentioned there a little relation in regards to Maresca, Dewsbury Hall. When we factor that into Manchester United, obviously Ruud van Nistelrooy is now at the club. I think a lot of Manchester United fans are very pleased to see him. There have been videos of him working with Rashford already, which already has raised the excitement inevitably amongst the United fans. But as I said, a link in terms of someone potentially that Van Nistelrooy has a strong view on is a certain Javi Simons. Now, I think potentially this could be something along the lines of the fact that because of Van Nistelrooy's history and, of course, Eric Ten Hag's admiration for Simons, it's quite an exciting potential deal. But is he really a player that Manchester United are looking at, or would you say that's more of a fairy tale rather than any concrete information behind
No,
it?
not necessarily a fairy tale. I mean, there's loads of Premier League clubs that are interested in Javi Simons. Manchester United can be classified as one of them, and they've made a outreach to work out what's actually possible. The thing with the Premier League clubs, and it's been the case with more than one, is that they would still prefer that permanence option. So Manchester United and others in loosely reaching out without necessarily advancing anything, are trying to understand less about when the timing is that they could move or how quickly they might need to advance things, and more whether or not PSG are going to bend on this permanence aspect. And if it is just a straight loan, then I'm not sure that that is for Manchester United, and the way for a player like that, that Jim Ratcliffe and his new sporting department want to do deals. So it's not yet too much to get excited about. It's Leipzig and Bayern, as I revealed months ago, that are the two clubs. And before the window opened, Leipzig were making a big push, and the feeling was that they stood a very realistic chance. Then Bayern entered the race, and those two clubs are prepared to do some form of straight loan if that's the only possibility. And still clubs are waiting to find that out. And because Javi Simons went off to the Euros, there's been a delay on the player side and his decision as well. And the reason why PSG are looking for a solution away from PSG in the short term and with no permanence now is because if they bring him back to PSG, then playing for PSG activates relatively costly bonuses that go to PSV. If they sell him now, PSV benefit more than PSG as well. If they wait until after January 2025, then that all drops off, at which point it's a better deal for PSG. So there could be option one, where they just do a loan, and the player may not want to do a half-season loan and then return to PSG, so a seasonal loan is most likely. And then we're really looking at a straight choice between Bayern and Leipzig at the moment, with the Premier League suitors reticent because there's a lack of permanence. But if PSG decide actually they've made a decision on Javi Simons, they don't want to sell now because it benefits PSV, but they are prepared to sell in summer 2025, at that point, it might be a loan with an option or a loan with an obligation. And then there is a permanence to the deal. And that was never PSG's preference, but it's all still being discussed. And of course, the player has a say in that and has been away at the Euros. So Manchester United, like other Premier League clubs, are waiting to see whether the door becomes ajar to anything more than just a straight loan. But if it is just a straight loan, then I think the likely destinations remain Bayern or Leipzig.
Yeah, I think I need to contain my excitement and have a bit of realism in terms of everything. I just want every single player. Clearly, Man United needs some reinforcements, so why not sign all of them? But no, jokes aside, Ben, I think I want to move your attention now to Aaron Wan-Bissaka. Now, of course, he has been linked with a move to West Ham. What could you tell us about this one? Could this move quickly? What's the fee being discussed, and where could you see some potential stumbling blocks in terms of this negotiation?
Yeah, I don't think there's many stumbling blocks because Manchester United have been pretty transparent in what they're looking for, a minimum of £50 million. So it's on West Ham now to work out whether they think that's value. And my understanding is the figures being discussed are not at the moment too far off that, which leads you to think that there's a deal there to be had. The West Ham priority, I would say, in terms of budget and movement is still striker. But that's not to say that they won't move concurrently. And we know on the striker front, they've looked at a variety of players. They've made an inquiry about Jonathan David. They've been in talks for John Duran, but Villa's £40 million asking price is too high. They've considered in the past Callum Wilson, who has Saudi interests. So a lot of their efforts have been put there. But now we're getting to the midway point, and it's a key point because certain players want to go now so they can have a full pre-season with their new club. Things tend to move a little bit quicker. And that's my feeling, that if West Ham really want Wan-Bissaka, they can get him. And they'll have to pay about 15 million as a minimum. And Manchester United will sanction that sale without too many complications. So the ball is very much in West Ham's court. Pay that number, which is not bad value, and then in likelihood, they'll get the player. Wan-Bissaka has got some Saudi interest as well. You may remember in January, Al Nassr made an offer that was a little bit higher than £15 million, but it was rejected by Manchester United because they wanted the depth. They wanted to keep the player. They didn't want too many changes in January. And also he didn't want to move mid-season. So from West Ham's point of view, their only worry will be that Saudi come again. It's a bigger offer. And then Manchester United hold West Ham to ransom for whatever offer Saudi make. And because the Saudi window opens on the 17th of July, it's kind of telling that clubs that feel they might be going head-to-head against a Saudi club are moving fast now to try and get ahead of the Saudi market and get things locked in, for fear, not necessarily that Wan-Bissaka would pick Saudi over West Ham, but for fear that Manchester United say to West Ham, sorry, we're only accepting the Saudi offer unless you go higher. And then there's almost a Saudi tax on non-Saudi deals just because they've stuck their oar in and the price goes high, and you use that as leverage. So let's see when things move. At the time we're recording, I broke something along with my colleague Alex Crick for TalkSport that basically said that talks are advancing, they're positive so far, and that Manchester United want a minimum of £15 million, and that's where we're at the moment.
Yeah. And just quickly, a final one in terms of that right back discussion. Are there any names that you've heard in terms of a replacement, or are Manchester United more focused on getting the sale done before they, turn their attention to somewhere else?
Yeah, I think right back will be a priority for sure. I'm not hearing any new names put in the market at the moment. I think Manchester United would definitely need some more depth on that side. But we know that the priority this window, along with two centre-backs, has actually been the left-sided player. And therefore, they could end up effectively signing a whole new defence between now and when the window's out, replacing Wan-Bissaka. Milos Kerkez has been one of the names considered on the left-hand side. Two new centre-backs come in and you think, wow, that's a lot in terms of a defensive revamp. But Ratcliffe has said, like I said to you before, it can't all be done in one window. So we wait and see, but they're definitely working more on centre-backs than a right-back at this point.
Yeah, I've just got two more questions for you, Ben, because I know we're really running out of time. But in terms of the defensive sales, if you like, in terms of Lindelof and Harry Maguire, is departures being put in place for any of these players? And what can we sort of predict, if you like, and what have you been told in regards to either of these players respectively moving on?
Yeah, I think Manchester United need sales to fund the rest of their window. It's pretty much as simple as that. And taking Rafa Varane off the wage bill is one thing, but trying to bring in some fees makes things a whole lot smoother. And the Greenwood fee will help, but the actual initial fee is lower than that 40 million that Manchester United wanted. So it's great to have this healthy 50% sell on. And as I revealed, it's not just 50%, they have options over time to buy even more. That may be a benefit in 3 to 5 years as opposed to right now. So cold hard cash in fixed fees definitely helps. And it's not to say Manchester United won't spend first, because they've got plenty of time to facilitate exits. But what you don't want is to spend, not get the exits, and then find June the 30th, 2025, it starts to catch up on you. But Manchester United is stepping up their efforts in particular to sell Victor Lindelof, who obviously is out of contract next year. So it's definitely the right time. And they've already agreed, and it's official, that Willy Quambala has gone to Villarreal. So that's another one out the door. But I think Lindelof's time is up at this point. So that will be one between now and the window for sure. And then with Maguire, I think it's probably more of a sensitive issue, simply because there's huge value, not only for the season that Maguire had, proving a lot of critics wrong last campaign, but the fact as well that he didn't go to the Euros. He's been recovering there from injury. He's only been focusing on fitness and Manchester United. And Harry Maguire is valued off the field as well. Despite being stripped of the captaincy, he had huge impact, not just as a footballer, but also in that dressing room and at Carrington. And that's why Manchester United won't quite be as adamant that he needs to be forced out the door. But if the right price comes, then he is another one that could depart as well. So you're looking at Lindelof, big focus, Maguire, possibly Scott McTominay, if an agreement can be reached with Fulham, Casemiro, if one can be reached with Saudi Arabia, and then Sancho, despite clearing the air, and we can maybe talk about that in a moment. If the right fee comes in, he still could be sold as well. So Manchester United would still ideally like to bring in, I would say, another 50 to 70 million minimum in order to go out there and bring in a couple more signings.
Yeah, it's going to be certainly a busy window ahead, isn't it, for Manchester United, as if it hasn't been busy already. Just very finally, Ben, in terms of Casemiro, in terms of Saudi Arabia, I don't think I've got anyone in my contact book more reliable than yourself when it comes to anything happening in that part of the world. So Casemiro to Saudi Arabia, is this transfer happening? And if we do have a little bit of time, could I push you for a bit of a Sancho information as well, maybe? But we'll start with Casemiro.
Yeah, I mean, the Casemiro thing hasn't moved only because the Saudi window opens on the 17th of July. It's not to say that they're not planning or even signing. We've seen Al Ittihad very active at the moment, but the reality of the situation is it's a little bit slower due to the fact you have Eid. Then they come and set themselves up in Europe as a base, and that's when the real business starts. So we've kind of seen a pre-Saudi window opening week with a lot of flurry. And Casemiro has interest from several clubs. Al Ittihad are one of them. And as I've said before, Al Nassr, Al Hilal, both in Riyadh, and even the newly promoted Aramco side, Al Qadsiya, have looked at Casemiro in the past as well. But this will be a central deal. And what that means is that the interest is expressed by several clubs, and then the central Saudi deal makers will decide where they think he's best allocated. And we saw this with Nacho, for example, where Al Ittihad felt they were going to sign him, but he ended up going to Al Qadsiya. And if the clubs are going to take the central funding, they kind of have to listen to what Michael Emenalo thinks is best for the Saudi Pro League, which is why we can't yet say that there's a singular Saudi club that are the only ones focused on Casemiro. And the central part of the deal makers are waiting to see whether Casemiro will move now. Because let's not forget, he's contracted at Manchester United until 2026. He may well be excited by the new regime, the depth, and the fact that he can go and play at midfield instead of centre-back as a result. And Manchester United have got a 1-year extension to trigger that could see him contract until 2027. So all of that protects value on the Manchester United side. And dealmakers indicated to John Murtagh in January and have since made contact with the newer regime and made it clear that if they're going to do this deal, you're looking at a fixed fee in the region of 35 million euros, but there will be bonuses on top. So the total package is not going to be 70 to 100 million euros. It might only be half that or a little bit more with bonuses included. But getting him off the wage bill and getting that money in might still be good value from Manchester United's perspective. So they're waiting on whether or not they do or don't have a green light from Casemiro. Then they'll allocate the club. Then if all of that goes according to plan, perhaps in the next week or two, but certainly by mid-August, we might finally see a formal offer land on the doorstep of Manchester United. And then at that point, things will move a lot quicker. And Manchester United, if Casemiro gives the green light, have just got to decide whether or not they're prepared to sanction a Casemiro sale at likely total package under 50 million euros rather than closer to 100 million, or if they still see value in him with diminished minutes as a squad player, knowing also that even in 2025, they can still get a fee for the player. And my overriding sense is that if that kind of ballpark is placed, this is the Saudi perspective anyway, they think Manchester United would accept. They'd get him off the wage bill. They'd go and sign a younger midfielder. So Casemiro to Saudi, still one to watch. And with Jadon Sancho, I think the reality is pretty clear at this stage. He's returned. He's never had a problem with Manchester United. He held positive talks with Erik ten Hag. This was always planned to clear the air. And Sancho now, we'll see how things go in pre-season, as will Erik ten Hag. There's no indication that there's going to be a future fallout or there's any bad blood. So all parties have moved on. And the only reason why Sancho wasn't part of the sort of Norway trip is because he's a bit behind in his return and his development. So Sancho's likely to feature for Manchester United now in pre-season. He's back with the first team squad. He's eligible for first team selection, but the door's not shut on an exit. And it's very smart by Manchester United, because if you clear the air and you want to potentially make it work, then one, there's no urgency for a sale, and two, suitors have no longer got any leverage to say, we're going to offer you less than you want because we know that you need to deal with this situation. Whereas with Greenwood, because Manchester United had ultimately decided pre-Ratcliffe in the review that they didn't want him to continue at the football club, and Ratcliffe has chosen to respect that, Marseille were in a stronger position to say, you don't want this lingering, here's the structure, take it or leave it. You can get to your 40 million or more, but only over time, but we're going to give you a much less upfront fixed fee. Whereas with Sancho, Manchester United don't have to worry about somebody doing the same or another loan. They can say, look, player's fine now. He loves Manchester United. He's made up with Ten Hag, 40 million or Otherwise, he's going to stay at the football club. And that should mean if Manchester United sell Sancho, they'll get closer to or at their asking price. But maybe we have to wait a little bit later in the window. So it's a fluid situation, but we can't shut the door yet on a Sancho exit. But what we can say is that the air's been cleared between him and Ten Hag.
Ben, superb as always. Thank you so much. I just want to apologize as well. I know we normally like to really get in depth about these discussions and topics, but as with everything going on with Manchester United, I've just had to rack your brains as much as I can for the listener. So thank you so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'm sure you'll be joining me very soon, my friend.
Always a pleasure, mate. Keep up the good work. We'll speak soon.
Thank you very much. And of course, thank you to everyone who has watched today's episode. Please be sure, as I always say, like, subscribe, follow on X, follow on YouTube. Can you even follow on YouTube? Subscribe on YouTube, of course. And please be sure to follow Ben on all platforms because he is right across it. If you didn't know already, you definitely know after this episode. So please be sure to join me again next week where I'll be joined with another guest with hopefully a lot more Manchester United information. Take care, everyone, and have a brilliant day.